My name's Jim Fournier. I've been interested in the state of the world all my life. I kind of set out to understand global problems and how we might find solutions to them. In 2000, I convened a conference called Planet Work that brought everybody doing tech, first for biodiversity and then any kind of tech for good. And that led to a whole community of people talking about tech and sustainability. I invest in technologies that are likely to completely change energy and industry, that both store energy coming from solar and renewables and then use that energy completely differently than fossil. First, I want to say, about geoengineering. It's kind of like the third rail of climate. It's like something that people don't want to talk about, and I think in some ways for good reason. Um, and I think in order to think about it, um, I think about climate and where we're at differently than I think most people.
Okay.
Um, Looking at what's happening with energy and the transformation of technology, fossil is over, and it's going to end for economic reasons. And it's going to actually end fairly soon and probably kind of abruptly. The problem is we've already overshot.
Hmm.
So we've already been putting so much carbon into the atmosphere that the planet is heating up and it's going to keep heating for a while.
Right.
And so we're probably going to hit, well, I think certainly going to hit this point where we've come to understand that we're not making it worse anymore. Fossil stopped because renewables came in and replaced it, but it's a lot hotter than we want it to be. And in that scenario, we might need to intervene to try and hold back warming temporarily until we can start to remove carbon and get the temperature down.
Right.
So that's a very different context than the way it's been talked about.
Yeah.
And for a long time, the argument against even thinking about geoengineering is that it would create an excuse for more fossil.
Right. Right.
It
Right.
seems like a moral hazard was the term. Like if you think about this, if you think this is a solution, you won't do what you need to do to cut carbon.
Yeah.
I think that actually is just completely mistaken for a number of reasons. One, no amount of moral outrage is changing the climate situation. The only
Mhm.
thing that's really changing it is the fact that solar and batteries are getting cheap fast.
Yeah. Very true.
That's where all the progress is actually happening. It's
Yeah.
from technology coming along that's cheaper and it's displacing it. And that's the only thing that's going in a really positive way and taking off.
Yeah.
So we could, and I think will likely be in this situation where we finally understand, okay, fossil is over, we're still in trouble. What are we going to do?
Right.
And the kind of intervention that's been assumed is to mimic a volcano.
Okay.
So when a volcano erupts, it throws a lot of gas into the atmosphere. And we've seen enough of these happen that we know that when they happen, the Earth is cooled for a couple of years. The gas goes into the high atmosphere and it reflects sunlight and it cools the planet.
Yeah.
And you could do this, purposefully by putting sulfur into the atmosphere. One of the problems with this is that in the years where this has happened, very often is not only cooler, but it's also drier.
Right.
And where it's going to get drier may or may not be predictable from what happens. And so, everything has a cost. I think people are a little more panicked about it than they need to. The world has seen a lot of volcanic eruptions. Nature knows how to deal with that. It's part of what does naturally happen. But the idea that you'd have to continuously do this for a number of decades is rightfully scary. And
Yeah.
I think the bigger fear is that, we don't know what it would do in a lot of detail. And so I spent some time with people that were climate modelers, and they were running computer models to try and understand what would happen, if you take an Earth model and you do this to it and predict what would happen. So that's kind of the standard geoengineering argument is sulfates, they're called, in the upper atmosphere.
Yeah.
There are other methods that have been proposed. One that I was involved with, the scientist that proposed it, is called marine cloud brightening.
Yeah. I
And
think that's the one that the billionaires got to be vocal about, right? Peter Thiel and the others.
yeah, and I mean, it feels more benign. You're basically creating little droplets of seawater that seed the clouds over the ocean and reflect more.
Yeah.
And we know this works because right now, when ships sail through the ocean, they give off a lot of sulfur, and that seeds clouds, and you can see these stripes where the ship went. And
Right.
so you can see the reflectivity of the cloud, and you can know that if you made more of it, it would reflect more sunlight, and it falls back out, and it just feels intuitively less frightening. And it probably is less apt to mess with rainfall.
Okay.
There's one other method that pretty much nobody has ever heard of that I heard about from women scientists from Finland. And it's called cirrus thinning. So cirrus clouds are very high in the atmosphere, and they're basically ice crystals. And so this layer of ice crystals very high in the atmosphere reflects heat back to the Earth.
Okay.
So in a climate model, cirrus clouds and the effect of CO2 are pretty much the same mathematically.
Okay.
And so, at least in theory, if you could thin cirrus clouds as uniformly as possible, it would be more like erasing out, putting a negative sign on CO2, like reversing exactly the thing that's being pushed too far in one direction and pushing it in the other direction.
Let's see.
I haven't heard, I've been out of this field for a decade. I don't know what's happened. But that was one that I was really curious about. And still feels like if you had to do something, it might be worth exploring.
Thank you for this. I think it's much better explained than what I was trying to say yesterday. So one of the other questions we had was actually geoengineering had happened over millions of years, and regardless of what people are saying on the news, the Earth have been very hot and very cold for several cycles, and plants, and algae and bacteria have been terraforming the planet Earth for millions of years, in fact, and it might happen again, with or without our control. Humans might make it or might not, but the planet will regulate itself with those bacteria and those biotopes that are making their way there. So, okay, could you explain that on a proper scientific expert way?
Well, a couple things come to mind. One is that one of the stories I like to tell about Earth
Yeah.
is that if we think of us as life, and we think of us as part of the same impulse that has been on the planet for billions of years,
Yeah.
what we're experiencing with climate now is the second climate crisis and at least the third energy crisis.
Okay.
So when life emerged out of the primordial soup, it ate the soup until it was pretty much gone and it had an energy crisis. No more soup.
Right.
And life had to scramble around and figure out a way to basically eat sunlight, to eat photons coming from the sun as a source of energy.
Yeah.
And this was called photosynthesis. It's still what plants do.
Yeah.
And so plants went along doing this for hundreds of millions of years and putting oxygen into the atmosphere. So the oxygen, the atmosphere had been one way. Now the plants are consuming sunlight. Now they're giving off oxygen. Now the atmosphere goes another way. They put so much oxygen into the atmosphere that, as far as we can tell, they were spontaneously bursting into flame.
Wow.
And we had the first atmospheric crisis, too much oxygen. So then life had to scramble around and invent respiration, which uses that high energy oxygen when you breathe in and out for energy. And so now you had photosynthesis and respiration. And those two basic chemical tricks were used by life for billions of years. And gradually, the atmosphere got more and more regulated. The temperature band that life was in got, it went through some extremes, but in general, life has pushed things into a narrower and narrower and more stable little window that is conducive to life. And we're benefiting from that. We are that impulse that has come along, and done that.
Yeah.
So now we're having an energy crisis and an atmospheric crisis. We've put too much CO2 in the atmosphere and it's getting hot. We're also, even if we weren't doing that, we might be running out of fossil hydrocarbons, but you could think of the hydrocarbons as this energy reserve that the Earth created for a very long time. It was like the white of the egg. And
Yeah.
we ate it very fast, just like the primordial soup, to do industrial civilization.
Yeah.
So now our technology is recreating what life did at the beginning, in a sense, recreating photosynthesis with solar photovoltaics and now some other processes that come after it. So in some ways, you could see what's happening with the evolution of technology as part of the same thread that was the evolution of life on this planet. And it's doing it in a different set of matter than life could, with biology. But it's all just, you can only put the puzzle together certain ways. Life could only put the puzzle together in certain ways. We can only put the puzzle together in certain ways. And once you put it together, you kind of get these solutions that you can do once. And so in a lot of ways, what we're doing now is we're creating a transformation of matter that is as fundamental as when life came out of the primordial soup.
Yeah. We're already doing terraforming on our own way,
We
basically.
are. We have, that's the other funny thing about geoengineering is that we're terrified that we would do something intentional.
But
We're
we are
not
already.
like unintentionally, we're just completely, transforming the thing in ways we don't want.
Yeah. 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 When we talk about all these highest temperature, etc., it's true for the past 10,000 years, but not for the past millions of years, right?
Well, for the last 2 million years, there have been glaciers, ice ages most of the time.
Yeah.
And there have been little periods in between the glaciers of about 10,000 years that they call interglacials. And we were at the end of one of those.
Right.
It was before we emitted all this carbon, it was headed for another ice age at some point soon. But you have to go back about 35 million years to find a time when it was as hot as it will be if we don't do something about where we're headed.
Okay.
At that point, there weren't humans around, there weren't primates around, and life was pushed up the poles, and you couldn't live at the equator. Like nothing could live at the equator.
I see.
So there have been a lot of modes where life can live on this planet. It's very adaptable. We've had 5, 6 extinction. We're in the 6th extinction events. We've had 5 other events where life got knocked back to whatever level of primitive critter. But humans would not be happy in any of those periods.
Yeah.
And we humans have emerged during a period when life has gotten the planet to a very stable Goldilocks place.
Yeah.
And really, our task now is to consciously keep it there. And we're unconsciously really jeopardizing it right now. If we don't act to intervene, over the long, both the near term and long term, we've already set in motion things that would really be intolerable. We need to remove an amount of carbon from the atmosphere and oceans that is pretty much unimaginable.
Know that we understand the historical facts and the solutions that are out there. If we were to choose one natural solution or one solution that looks as natural as possible, which one will it be? Is algae or marine cloud seeding or
Well,
azola? What is the number one or number two
uh,
solutions that you would recognize as a health doctor for
there,
humanity?
there is no one solution. I spent a few years of my life popularizing something called biochar. I set
Yeah.
out to start the biochar industry.
You did
And
the first one in the US, apparently,
yeah,
from
I
what we.
started the first like sort of commercial biochar company and lost some money doing it. Um, the idea of biochar is that when you grow a plant, now the plant took carbon out of the air because it built the plant out of carbon that it took out of the air. So it takes CO2 to build the structure of the plant. When the plant dies, if it rots, it all goes back in the air. Or if it
Mm,
rots, it all goes back in the air. So the idea with biochar was to um, put it in a form that won't break down in the soil so that you can sort of store the plants away and accumulate the storage. And it'll do some. The most interesting idea I just heard last night, lots of people are now thinking about how to store carbon away. And this is good. This is going to be the problem that we have to deal with for 100 years. I don't know. There was a movie once made where they played the film backwards and like the bombs are coming up from the ground and going back in the belly of the plane and the plane's flying backwards and they're unloading the bombs and they're just running the film backwards. That's kind of like what's up in front of us with climate. We've
mm,
spent, you know, a couple of 100 years and really 100 years very intensively getting all this energy out of the hydrocarbons. And we needed that to get escape velocity for civilization.
yeah.
But now we have to go unwind that. And so we need sources of energy that don't do that. And the two really big ones are solar and a form of nuclear that would be a whole other podcast. I like those. And then the best way to get carbon out of the air, you can do it with current plants. You can do it with algae and trees and things, but you get, reforesting more surface area of the earth will do a certain amount, but it won't do the fossil debt.
Mm,
Because when we started, we cut down all those trees. So when we grow the trees back, we get as much as we lost when we cut the trees down for agriculture. We don't
yeah.
get all the extra fossil carbon, and there's no way that growing trees is going to.
Offset those dinosaur
Yeah.
oil that have been burned. Yeah.
A really interesting idea I just heard. So this guy was talking about biomass and whether to use it for energy and what to do with it. And that really it doesn't make sense. Energy's getting cheap. So you don't use it for energy mostly. The most obvious and really dumb idea I heard is you can make it's called pyrolysis oil. It's basically like making oil out of plants. And then you pump it down in a dead oil well.
So you create oil again, and
You're putting the oil back.
that
And we could
that's
actually
weird. That's
potentially
really
have an
weird.
oil industry for 100 years where we pyrolyze, we grow the plants with the sunlight and the carbon out of the air. We make the oil, we pump the oil back down, and we're basically running the whole thing backwards to put the
That's
oil.
brilliant. That's
Um,
brilliant.
I don't know about that.
anyway, I mean,
I mean, that would make the oil and gas industry to keep making money.
well, no, because the point is the oil and gas industry is it's going to be cheaper to get energy from solar and from certain forms of nuclear, I think, than from fossil.
Right.
That's
Right.
why
Right.
fossil ends. It doesn't, well, also because we understand that you can't keep burning the stuff because it creates a huge problem. So, you need to pay. We call it a carbon tax, but you just need to pay for the consequences of burning it, which is all these negatives. So, you should have to incur those things in the price of burning it.
Right. Which is another long regulatory story.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think things are going to happen from regulation. I think they're going to happen. So I invest in a lot of technologies because that's where I think things are changing. It's the only thing that I'm seeing really change it is these new ways of doing things that are better and rapidly cheaper than the old ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was really good.
Very
I
nice.
hope it was helpful for you.
It
Very.
is.
Okay.
Yeah.